The alarm system screamed across Kepler Station as the Kryn swarm tore through the outer defensive shields. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Valiant, watching the battle unfold on the tactical display. The station was a massive structure that floated in neutral space, a place where dozens of alien species came to trade and conduct business. Now it was under attack and thousands of civilians were trapped inside. "How many council ships are engaging?" Jake asked, his eyes fixed on the screen. Lieutenant Amy Parker checked her console. 12 warships, sir. They're following standard defensive protocols. Jake watched as the council forces moved into their traditional formations. The ships formed a protective wall between the Kryn and the station, firing in controlled bursts. It looked organized and professional, but something was wrong. The Kryn ships kept coming, wave after wave, and the council line was starting to bend. "They're not stopping them," Amy said quietly. The Kryn were insectoid creatures, each ship controlled by a hive mind that didn't care about casualties. They threw their vessels forward like waves crashing against rocks, and slowly, the rocks were beginning to crack. Jake had read about galactic warfare protocols during his training. The council species fought with honor, following rules that had been established thousands of years ago. They avoided unnecessary destruction, gave enemies chances to surrender, and retreated when casualties reached certain levels. The Kryn didn't care about any of that. "Sir, the council fleet is pulling back," Amy reported. "They've reached their casualty threshold." Jake felt his jaw tighten. The council ships were withdrawing, leaving the station exposed. He could see escape pods launching from Kepler Station, desperate civilians fleeing as Kryn boarding craft attached to the hull like parasites. "Commander Hughes, what's our status?" Jake asked. Ben Hughes, a stocky man with gray hair and 3 decades of military experience, checked the ship's systems. "The 3rd Marine Battalion is ready for deployment. All dropships are loaded and standing by. The council is retreating," Amy said, her voice uncertain. "Should we wait for new orders?" Jake looked at the tactical display again. More Kryn ships were arriving and the station's shields were failing. If they waited for the council to reorganize and follow proper diplomatic channels, everyone on that station would be dead. "No," Jake said firmly. "We're not waiting. Commander Hughes, launch all dropships. Amy, I want the Valiant in close support position. We're going in." The bridge crew hesitated for just a moment. They weren't used to this. The council moved slowly with committees and approval chains. But Jake Morrison was human, and humans had learned a long time ago that sometimes you had to act fast or people died. "Yes, sir," Ben said, and the ship burst into activity. The Valiant accelerated toward Kepler Station, its engines burning hot. Behind it, 20 dropships launched from the hangar bay, each one carrying 40 Marines. The council forces had pulled back to a safe distance, regrouping and treating their wounded. Through the communication channels, Jake could hear confused alien voices asking what the humans were doing. Admiral Thexnor, a tall, 4-armed Vaxel commander, appeared on Jake's screen. His face was a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Captain Morrison, you are not following engagement protocols. The Kryn have established superior tactical position. Standard procedure requires withdrawal and reassessment." "With respect, Admiral, standard procedure will get everyone on that station killed," Jake replied. "My Marines are going in." "This is highly irregular," Thexnor said, but he didn't order them to stop. Perhaps he was curious, or perhaps he simply didn't understand humans well enough to predict what they would do. The dropships hit the station like meteors. Instead of docking at the designated ports, the human pilots crashed through damaged sections of the hull, using cutting torches and explosive charges to make their own entrances. The Marines poured out in full combat armor, weapons ready, moving through the corridors with practiced efficiency. Staff Sergeant Danny Cooper led his squad through a smoke-filled passageway. The Kryn warriors were everywhere, their chittering mandibles and multi-jointed limbs making them look like nightmares come to life. But Danny and his Marines had trained for this. They had trained for everything. "Contact front," someone shouted, and the corridor erupted with gunfire. The Kryn charged forward in a mass of bodies the way they always did. They relied on overwhelming numbers and biological weapons. Against council forces who fought in careful formations and avoided excessive casualties, this tactic worked well. Against human Marines, it was suicide. Danny's squad spread out, using every bit of cover available. They fired in coordinated bursts, overlapping their fields of fire, creating a wall of lead that no living thing could cross. When the Kryn tried to flank them through side corridors, the Marines were already there with grenades and automatic weapons. When the Kryn tried to retreat, the Marines followed, pressing forward, giving no quarter. "They're breaking," Corporal Lisa Martinez shouted. It was true. The Kryn warriors, who moments ago had been swarming forward with absolute confidence, were now scrambling backward. They weren't used to this kind of aggression. Council forces would have paused to secure their position, would have waited for reinforcements, would have followed proper tactical doctrine. The humans just kept coming. Throughout the station, the same scene repeated itself. Human Marines moved like water, flowing around obstacles, finding weak points, exploiting every advantage. They used tactics that would have been considered brutal by galactic standards. They set ambushes. They used suppressing fire to pin enemies down and then flanked them. They called in precise fire support from the Valiant, blowing holes in the station's structure without hesitation. Captain Jake watched from the bridge as his Marines systematically cleared the station. Amy was coordinating fire support, her voice calm and professional as she directed the Valiant's weapons to hit specific targets. Ben was managing the ground operation, moving squads like chess pieces, always staying 3 steps ahead of the enemy. "Sir, the Kryn command ship is trying to escape," Amy reported. "Don't let it," Jake ordered. "If it gets away, it'll just come back with more ships." The Valiant broke away from the station and accelerated after the fleeing Kryn vessel. It was larger than Jake's ship, with heavier armor and more weapons, but the human captain had no intention of fighting fair. The Valiant came in low and fast, targeting the enemy ship's engines with concentrated fire. The Kryn vessel tried to return fire, but the Valiant was already moving, rolling and dodging with maneuvers that would have been impossible for most Council ships. "Engines hit," Amy said. "They're dead in the water." "Finish it," Jake ordered. The Valiant's main guns spoke once more, and the Kryn command ship exploded in a brilliant flash. There would be no survivors, no prisoners, no chance for the enemy to regroup and try again. It was efficient, brutal, and effective. 6 hours after the first human dropship had crashed into Kepler Station, the battle was over. The Kryn were either dead or fleeing into deep space. The station was secure, the civilians were safe, and the human Marines were already helping with rescue operations. Admiral Thexnor stood in the station's command center, watching the humans work. His forearms were crossed in a gesture that might have indicated thought or concern. Commander Ben Hughes approached him, his armor scored with blast marks, but his expression calm. "The station is secure, Admiral," Ben reported. "We've evacuated all civilians to safe zones and cleared every Kryn warrior. Medical teams are treating the wounded." "Your forces were very aggressive," Thexnor said carefully. "The Kryn had superior numbers. By all tactical calculations, they should have held the station for at least another day." "Superior numbers don't mean much if you don't use them right," Ben replied. "The Kryn fight with swarm tactics. You counter that with concentrated fire and aggressive maneuvering. Basic stuff." "Basic?" Thexnor's head tilted slightly. "Your Marines operated without regard for their own safety. They pursued enemies instead of consolidating positions. They used explosive weapons inside a civilian station. These are not standard tactics." "They're standard for us," Ben said with a slight smile. "We do what works." Captain Jake joined them, having shuttled over from the Valiant. The young captain looked tired but satisfied. Thexnor studied him with his large, compound eyes. "Captain Morrison, I must ask you a question," the Admiral said. "These Marines who fought today, these warriors who defeated the Kryn so decisively, are they your elite forces? Your most highly trained soldiers?" Jake exchanged a glance with Ben, and both men smiled. It wasn't a mocking smile, just one of genuine amusement. "Elite," Jake said. "No, Admiral. These are regular Marines. Standard deployment. 3rd Battalion rotates through stations like this all the time. They're good soldiers, well-trained, but they're not special operations or anything like that." Thexnor was quiet for a long moment. His forearms uncrossed and then crossed again in a different pattern. "I see," he said finally. "Then I would very much not like to meet your elite warriors." "Hopefully you won't have to," Jake said. "The galaxy's a safer place when the really dangerous humans can stay home." The Admiral wasn't sure if that was meant to be reassuring or not. The council chamber was a massive dome on the planet Vexar Prime, designed to hold representatives from 200 different species. Today it was filled to capacity. Everyone wanted to understand what had happened at Kepler Station. Everyone wanted to know about the humans. Dr. Lisa Chen stood at the center podium, looking up at the thousands of faces, tentacles, and sensor organs pointed in her direction. She was a xenoanthropologist, someone who studied alien cultures, but today she was here to explain her own species. The weight of all those eyes made her nervous, but she had prepared for this. Counselor Velthar, a tall reptilian from the Sarith Concordat, spoke first. His voice was smooth and measured. Dr. Chen, thank you for coming. We have reviewed the records from Kepler Station. The human military response was unlike anything in our database. We need to understand why your species fights the way it does. Lisa took a deep breath. Counselor, to understand human warfare, you need to understand human history. And to be honest, most of it isn't very pleasant. She activated the holographic display and images began to appear above the podium. Earth rotating slowly, looking beautiful and blue. Then the images changed, showing ancient battlefields, medieval castles, modern cities and ruins. Humanity has been at war for its entire existence, Lisa said. We have records of organized warfare going back 10,000 years. We have evidence of tribal conflicts going back even further. In all that time, there has never been a single generation of humans who didn't experience war somewhere on our planet. A murmur ran through the council. Many species had fought wars in their past, but not like this. Not constantly, not endlessly. Why? Asked a delegate from the peaceful Mercian Commonwealth. Why would your species fight so much? Because we had to, Lisa said simply. She changed the display to show Earth's prehistoric landscape. Most of you evolved on worlds with limited predators. Your ancestors developed intelligence in relatively safe environments. Earth was different. When our ancestors came down from the trees, everything wanted to eat them. The hologram showed massive creatures, saber-toothed cats, cave bears, dire wolves. Humans survived because we learned to work together and fight back. We made weapons. We developed tactics. We became persistence hunters, chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We became so good at killing that we drove dozens of megafauna species to extinction. Colonel Ryan Matthews, standing beside Lisa in his military dress uniform, added his perspective. And when we ran out of predators to fight, we fought each other. Humans competed for resources, territory, and survival. We developed warfare into a science because it was necessary. Kate Sullivan, a human historian, joined them at the podium. We invented cavalry charges, phalanx formations, naval warfare, siege tactics, guerrilla warfare, and total war. We created weapons that could kill thousands at once. We wrote books on military strategy that are still studied today. War shaped every aspect of our civilization. The council delegates listened in silence as the humans explained concepts that were alien to most of them. Scorched earth tactics, where armies destroyed everything in their path to deny resources to enemies. Asymmetric warfare, where smaller forces used unconventional methods to defeat larger ones. Psychological warfare, designed to break enemy morale before the first shot was fired. But surely you have rules, Velthar said. Laws of war, codes of conduct? We do, Ryan said. The Geneva Conventions, the Hague Conventions, international laws of armed conflict. But here's what you need to understand. We didn't create those rules to limit our effectiveness in war. We created them to make sure we didn't wipe ourselves out completely. The weight of that statement settled over the council chamber like a heavy blanket. Lisa pulled up more data. In the 20th century alone, we fought 2 global wars that killed over 100 million people. We developed nuclear weapons capable of destroying our entire civilization. We came closer to extinction than most species ever do. And we did it to ourselves. Then you learned peace? Someone asked hopefully. We learned restraint, Ryan corrected. There's a difference. We still fight wars. We're just more careful about how we fight them. Kate advanced the presentation to show modern human history. After we achieved spaceflight, our governments agreed to restrictions on military deployment in council space. We sent only a small fraction of our forces because we didn't want to frighten our new neighbors. How small? Velthar asked. Ryan smiled slightly. The forces at Kepler Station represented about 2% of our total military capability. The council chamber erupted in noise. Delegates stood, shouted questions, and demanded clarification. 2%? That small force had destroyed a Kryn invasion fleet in 6 hours, and it was only 2%? Velthar raised his voice to restore order. Colonel Matthews, are you saying that humanity maintains military forces 50 times larger than what we witnessed? Actually, that calculation is a bit off, Ryan said. We have standing armies, reserve forces, special operations units, and strategic response teams. The Marines at Kepler Station were regular infantry. Standard soldiers. We have much more specialized units for different situations. Different situations? Belthar asked carefully. Lisa stepped forward again. The colonel is trying to say that we have different types of soldiers for different threats. Regular forces like the Marines handle conventional warfare. We also have rapid deployment forces for quick response scenarios. Beyond that, we have special operations soldiers who are trained for missions that require more specialized skills. And you maintain all of these forces simultaneously? A delegate asked. Yes, Ryan said. Our species learned a long time ago that if you want peace, you need to be prepared for war. It's a concept we call peace through strength. We maintain large, well-trained, well-equipped military forces specifically so we don't have to use them. That seems contradictory, Belthar observed. Kate shook her head. It's very human, actually. We're a species of contradictions. We're capable of great violence, but we prefer peace. We're territorial, but we form alliances. We're competitive, but we cooperate. These contradictions make us unpredictable, which is probably terrifying from a military standpoint. Ryan pulled up a new display showing human military organization. Let me walk you through our force structure. At the bottom, you have regular infantry like the Marines at Kepler Station. They make up the bulk of our forces. Above them, you have specialized infantry units, airborne troops who drop from aircraft, rangers who conduct long-range operations, mechanized units who fight with armored vehicles. The display showed different unit patches and organizational charts. The council delegates leaned forward, trying to understand the complex structure. Beyond regular forces, we have special operations units, Ryan continued. These are soldiers selected for their exceptional abilities and trained for specific mission types. They conduct operations behind enemy lines, gather intelligence, perform sabotage, and execute precision strikes. And these special operations soldiers are your most dangerous warriors? Belthar asked. Ryan and Lisa exchanged glances. They're among our most highly trained personnel, Ryan said carefully. But defining dangerous is complicated. Different units excel at different things. A delegate from the Korath Union stood up. Colonel Matthews, I must ask directly, how many soldiers does humanity have? Ryan was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Active duty personnel across all branches, approximately 30 million. Reserve forces, another 50 million. Those numbers include support personnel, logistics, medical staff, and administrative roles. Actual combat personnel make up about 40% of that total. The numbers hung in the air like a bomb. Most council species maintained military forces numbering in the thousands at most. The Vaxil, one of the largest military powers, had maybe 2 million soldiers across their entire empire. Humanity, a single species from one planet, had trained soldiers numbering in the tens of millions. Why? Someone asked quietly. Why do you need so many? Kate answered this time. Because our history taught us that threats can appear suddenly and grow quickly. We watched peaceful civilizations fall to aggressive neighbors because they weren't prepared. We learned that by the time you realize you need a large military, it's too late to build one, so we maintain our readiness even during peacetime. Lisa added, it's also cultural. Many human societies have traditions of military service. Young people join the armed forces to gain skills, discipline, and education. Veterans are respected members of our communities. For us, maintaining a strong military isn't just about defense, it's part of our social structure. Belthar sat back in his chair, his scales rippling in a pattern that indicated deep thought. Dr. Chen, Colonel Matthews, Miss Sullivan, I believe I speak for the Council when I say that we are both reassured and concerned by this information. Reassured that humanity has such capability to defend against threats, concerned about what it means to have such powerful potential allies. Or enemies, someone muttered. Ryan heard it. We don't want to be anyone's enemy. Humanity sought out the Council because we wanted to join a peaceful galactic community. We've seen what endless warfare does to a civilization. We don't want that anymore. But you're prepared for it, Belthar said. The warning came at dawn across 12 systems simultaneously. Krell warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and began their assault without any declaration or negotiation. They simply appeared and started killing. General Chris Walker stood in the Earth Defense Force Command Center, watching the tactical displays light up with red markers. Each marker represented a Krell fleet, and there were dozens of them. The scale of the invasion was massive, coordinated, and brutal. "Get me Ambassador Torres," Chris ordered. Nina Torres appeared on the screen within seconds. She was at the Council headquarters on Vexar Prime, and her face showed the strain of the past few hours. "General, the Council is in emergency session. They're requesting immediate assistance." "What's the situation?" Chris asked. "Bad. The Krell hit agricultural worlds, mining colonies, and trading hubs. They're avoiding major military installations and targeting civilian infrastructure. Council forces are scattered trying to protect everyone, and the Krell are cutting them apart." Chris studied the tactical map. The Krell were a species that the Council had been watching nervously for decades. They had conquered 40 star systems through slow, methodical expansion. They were patient, calculating, and ruthless. Apparently, they had decided that the Council was weak enough to challenge. "How many ships do we have in Council space?" Chris asked his tactical officer. 16 warships, General. About 5,000 Marines spread across various stations." Chris shook his head. "Not enough. Nina, tell the Council we're going to need authorization to bring in reinforcements." "What kind of reinforcements?" Nina asked carefully. The Council was already nervous about human military capability after the revelations from Dr. Chen's presentation. "I'm sending the 7th Ranger Division and the 12th Airborne Battalion," Chris said. "About 15,000 soldiers total, plus support vessels and equipment." Nina's eyes widened slightly. "General, those aren't regular Marines. The Council specifically asked about our elite forces. If we deploy Rangers and Airborne, they're going to think we're escalating." "We are escalating," Chris said firmly. "The Krell aren't playing by Council rules. They're hitting hard and fast, targeting civilians using terror tactics. If we send regular Marines, we'll just be putting more bodies in the grinder. We need rapid deployment forces that can operate independently and hit back twice as hard." "I'll inform the Council," Nina said. "They won't like it, but they're desperate enough to agree." She was right. Within 2 hours, the Council had authorized human reinforcements with only one condition. They wanted observers attached to human units to report on their methods. Chris agreed immediately. Let them watch. Maybe they would learn something. The human ships began arriving 3 days later. They didn't come in a massive fleet that would take weeks to organize. Instead, they appeared in small groups at different locations throughout the conflict zone. Ranger companies deployed to contested worlds where Council forces were being overrun. Airborne battalions positioned themselves in orbit around key systems, ready to drop at a moment's notice. Lieutenant Sam Cooper sat in the cockpit of his dropship, waiting for the green light. Below him, the planet Carix 4 was burning. The Krell had landed 2 divisions of ground forces and were systematically destroying the colony infrastructure. Council forces had tried to evacuate civilians, but the Krell had shot down the transport ships. Now thousands of colonists were trapped in underground shelters while the enemy methodically hunted them. 2 minutes to drop, the pilot announced. Sam checked his equipment one more time. He was part of the 12th Airborne Battalion, and this was what they trained for. Combat drops into hostile territory with no support and no backup. The Council observer, a nervous Vaxil lieutenant named Carrick, sat across from him looking terrified. "Is it always like this?" Carrick asked. "Like what?" Sam replied so fast. "No planning phase, no reconnaissance, no proper preparation." Sam smiled behind his helmet. "This is the planning phase. We're gathering reconnaissance right now with our sensor packages. And we prepared for this scenario about 100 times in training. You'll see." The dropship hit the atmosphere and everything started shaking. Through the viewport, Sam could see dozens of other dropships streaking down like meteors. The Krell had anti-aircraft batteries set up all over the landing zone, and they opened fire immediately. Several dropships exploded in midair, but the rest kept coming. 30 seconds, the pilot shouted. Sam stood up, grabbed the handrail, and prepared for impact. The dropship slammed into the ground hard enough to rattle teeth. The rear ramp dropped, and suddenly they were in hell. Krell warriors were everywhere, their heavy weapons tearing up the ground around the landing zone. The human soldiers poured out of their dropships and immediately began moving. This was what airborne forces did. They dropped into the worst situations imaginable, and they fought their way out. No time to dig in, no time to establish a proper perimeter, just constant movement, aggressive action, and overwhelming violence. Sam's squad spread out in a loose formation, using every bit of cover available. The Krell tried to swarm them. the same tactic that had worked so well against Council forces. But the humans had studied the Kepler station reports. They knew how the Krell fought, and they had prepared counters for every tactic. "Air support incoming," someone shouted. Human fighters screamed overhead, dropping precision munitions on Krell positions. The enemy anti-aircraft batteries that had been so effective against Council forces were simply destroyed before they could respond. The Krell commanders had expected a slow, methodical battle. Instead, they got chaos. Across the planet, ranger companies were conducting deep penetration raids. They moved through Krell-held territory like ghosts, appearing suddenly to destroy command posts, supply depots, and communication centers. They didn't hold ground or try to defend positions. They just kept moving, hitting targets and disappearing before the enemy could respond. Captain Ellen Baker led her ranger company through a forest that the Krell had turned into a fortified position. Council forces had tried to assault it twice and been repulsed both times with heavy casualties. The Council had expected the Rangers to try the same frontal assault with better equipment. Instead, Ellen had her company split into 4-person teams and infiltrate through the forest over the course of 12 hours. They moved slowly, carefully, avoiding Krell patrols and sensor nets. By the time the sun rose, they were positioned throughout the enemy fortification, waiting. The attack lasted 10 minutes. Synchronized explosive charges destroyed the Krell command bunkers. Sniper teams eliminated officers and communication specialists. Assault teams hit ammunition stores and vehicle parks. By the time the Krell realized they were under attack, the battle was already over. The Council observers were stunned. A position that had held against 2 battalion-sized assaults had fallen to 200 Rangers without a single frontal assault. When they asked Ellen how she had done it, her answer was simple. "We went around them instead of through them." It seemed obvious in retrospect, but it wasn't how Council forces operated. They fought with honor, with clear battle lines and identifiable front. The humans fought to win, using whatever tactics were most effective regardless of tradition or convention. The Krell were discovering that their standard strategies didn't work against humans. They were used to fighting enemies who valued the lives of their soldiers, who would retreat when casualties got too high, who followed predictable patterns. Human commanders threw soldiers into situations that seemed suicidal, and somehow those soldiers came out victorious. On the planet Thresh Major, an entire Krell armored division was destroyed by a single airborne company that dropped directly into their logistics base. Without fuel and ammunition, the tanks and vehicles were useless. The Krell soldiers abandoned them and tried to fight on foot, only to discover that human infantry was even more dangerous than their vehicles. In the Vortex system, Ranger teams spent 2 weeks operating behind Krell lines, living off captured supplies and setting up ambushes along every supply route. The Krell fleet in orbit around Vortex III slowly starved as every supply convoy was destroyed or captured. When Council reinforcements finally arrived, they found the Krell ships trying to retreat and human Rangers broadcasting coordinates for targeting strikes. General Chris Walker monitored the campaign from Earth, making adjustments as needed. The Rangers and airborne forces were performing exactly as expected, but he was careful not to commit them carelessly. These weren't disposable troops. They were highly trained specialists, and each one represented years of investment in training and equipment. "How are the Council observers reacting?" Chris asked Nina during one of their regular updates. "They're terrified and impressed in equal measure," Nina said. "They're sending reports about human combat methods that read like horror stories. Soldiers who drop from orbit into active combat zones, teams that operate independently for weeks without resupply, units that seem to appear and disappear at will. Are they complaining?" "No," Nina admitted. "Because we're winning. The Krell are being pushed back on every front. Their invasion is collapsing, it was true. The Krell had assumed that they would face the same kind of..." Captain Kyle Stevens of Council Intelligence had been reviewing classified documents for 6 months when he found the first anomaly. It was a small thing, easily missed. A Krell command bunker that had been destroyed with no record of any attack. The official report said it had been eliminated, but there was no mention of which unit had conducted the operation. Kyle was good at his job because he noticed small things. He started looking for more anomalies, and he found them. Krell admirals who had disappeared without explanation. Supply depots that exploded with no attacking force in the area. Communication networks that went silent at critical moments. The pattern was consistent across all 12 systems where the war had been fought. Someone had been operating behind enemy lines, conducting missions that officially never happened. Kyle brought his findings to his superior officer, who looked at the data and went very quiet. "You need to stop investigating this," his superior said. "Why?" "Something was happening during the war that wasn't reported. Don't we have a right to know?" "It's human operations, Kyle. Things they did that they don't want to discuss. My advice is to let it go." But Kyle couldn't let it go. He had spent 2 years studying human military capabilities, and he thought he understood them. The Marines at Kepler Station had shown him how humans fought conventional battles. The Rangers and airborne forces during the Krell War had demonstrated their rapid deployment capabilities. But these anomalies suggested something else entirely, something the humans had kept hidden. He requested a meeting with Agent Beth Warner, the human intelligence liaison to the Council. Beth was a quiet woman in her 30s who always seemed to know more than she said. When Kyle presented his findings, she sat in silence for a long moment before responding. "You're perceptive," Beth said finally. "Most people wouldn't have noticed those patterns. So I'm right? There were human operations during the war that weren't reported?" "Yes, special operations forces were deployed during the Krell War. They conducted missions that remain classified." "Why?" "We're allies. We should know what forces were operating in our territory." Beth chose her words carefully. "Special operations forces exist in a different category than regular military units. They conduct operations that governments prefer to maintain deniability about. The missions you found evidence of were successful. They helped win the war, and it's better for everyone if they remain officially unacknowledged." "I want to see what they can do," Kyle said. "That's not possible." "Why not? The Council has hosted training exercises with your Marines and Rangers. Why not special operations?" Beth looked at him for a long moment. "Because showing you what special operations forces can do might damage relations between our species. It's one thing to see soldiers fighting in open combat. It's another thing to see what happens when we send operators who are trained to move unseen and strike without warning." "I need to see it," Kyle insisted. "The Council needs to understand the full scope of human capabilities. If we're going to be true allies, there can't be secrets like this." Beth was quiet, considering. Finally, she nodded. "I'll arrange a demonstration. But don't say I didn't warn you." 3 weeks later, Kyle found himself standing in the command center of Council Military Base 17, one of the most secure facilities in galactic space. The base was home to 2,000 elite Council troops, protected by multiple layers of security, sensor nets, automated defenses, and patrol schedules that had been refined over decades. Admiral Jake Morrison was there, the same captain who had led the Marines at Kepler Station, now promoted after his successes in the Krell War. He greeted Kyle with a professional handshake. "Agent Warner tells me you want to see special operations in action," Jake said. "Yes, Admiral. I believe the Council needs to understand what we're dealing with." "Fair enough. We've set up a training exercise. One of our operators has been given a mission. Infiltrate this base, reach the command center, and tag all senior officers with training markers. If he succeeds, the markers will show up under ultraviolet light. The base security forces have been informed that this is a penetration test, and they've been ordered to stop the infiltrator by any means necessary." "One operator?" Kyle asked. "Against 2,000 troops?" "That's right. The operator goes by the call sign Ghost. He's already on the base somewhere. Started his infiltration about 4 hours ago." Kyle looked at the security displays. Every entrance was monitored. Patrol teams moved through the facility in randomized patterns. Sensor systems checked for any anomalies. It looked impenetrable. "How long will this exercise take?" Kyle asked. "Ghost has 8 hours to complete the mission. If he fails, he'll withdraw and we'll call it a draw." They waited. Kyle watched the security feeds obsessively, looking for any sign of the infiltrator. The base security forces were on high alert, checking every corridor, every room, every potential hiding spot. But there was nothing. No alarms, no sightings, no indication that anyone was inside who shouldn't be there. After 4 hours, Kyle was beginning to think the operator had been caught or had given up. Then Admiral Jake's communicator buzzed. He looked at the screen and smiled. "Exercise complete," Jake said. "Ghost has exfiltrated the base." "What?" "That's impossible. The security feeds show nothing. No one reached this command center." Jake touched a control and suddenly the lights changed. Under ultraviolet illumination, Kyle could see glowing markers on the uniforms of every senior officer in the command center. Including himself. When? Kyle demanded. When did he mark us? Based on the marker's placement, I'd say about an hour ago, Jake said. He was probably in this room while we were watching the security feeds. Kyle felt his blood run cold. That's impossible. We would have seen him. No, you wouldn't have. That's what special operations soldiers do. They move through defended positions without being detected. They accomplish objectives that conventional forces can't. Show me the footage, Kyle demanded. Beth activated a recording. It showed the command center from a chest-mounted camera, presumably worn by Ghost. The footage was surreal. It showed the operator moving through ventilation ducts, crawling along narrow spaces, waiting motionless for hours as patrols passed by. It showed him entering the command center through a maintenance access panel that security had considered too small for anyone to use. The operator had been lying in the ceiling space, directly above them for 20 minutes listening to their conversation, waiting for the right moment to descend. When he did move, it was so fast and smooth that the camera barely captured it. He dropped down, applied markers to each officer in rapid succession, and disappeared back into the ceiling before anyone could react. He was right there, Kyle whispered, right above us. Special operations soldiers are trained to operate in environments where detection means death, Jake explained. They learn to move silently, to remain motionless for hours, to exploit every weakness in security systems. Ghost is good, but he's not unique. We have thousands of operators with similar capabilities. How is this possible? No species in the galaxy can do this, Beth spoke up. Humans evolved as hunters. We learned to track prey, to read environments, to think like our targets. Special operations training takes those natural abilities and amplifies them. The soldiers selected for these units undergo years of training that most species would consider inhumane. They learn to survive in any environment, to resist interrogation, to operate without support deep in enemy territory. Kyle watched the footage again and again. The operator moved like water, flowing through spaces that seemed impossible to navigate. He bypassed security systems that should have been foolproof. He accomplished a mission that every tactical analyst would have called impossible. During the Krell War, Beth said quietly, we deployed 5 special operations teams. About 50 operators total. They conducted 237 missions, all classified. They destroyed 32 command centers, eliminated 58 high-value targets, captured 17 enemy intelligence officers for interrogation, and disrupted every major Krell communication network. And no one saw them. Why didn't you tell us? Kyle asked. Because this is frightening, Jake said bluntly. The Marines at Kepler Station scared the Council because they fought aggressively. The Rangers and airborne forces scared you because they operated independently and hit hard. But Special Operations Forces? They're something else entirely. They're soldiers who can appear anywhere, strike without warning, and disappear without a trace. They're assassins, Kyle said. They're operators, Jake corrected. They conduct missions that require precision, stealth, and capabilities beyond what conventional forces can provide. Sometimes those missions involve elimination of targets. Sometimes they involve intelligence gathering, sabotage, or rescue operations. They're tools that we hope to never need, but when we do need them, nothing else will work. Kyle understood now why his superior had told him to stop investigating. The existence of human special operations forces was the kind of secret that changed how species viewed each other. It was one thing to have powerful allies. It was another thing to know those allies could send soldiers into your most secure facilities, and you would never see them coming. How many of these operators do you have? Kyle asked. The archaeological team on Zareth Prime thought they had found ruins from the progenitor civilization, the ancient species that had seeded the galaxy with technology millions of years ago. What they actually found was something far worse, a prison. The distress call reached Council space 3 days after the excavation team activated what they thought was a power source. By the time the first response ships arrived, Zareth Prime was gone. Not destroyed, not evacuated. Gone. The entire planet had been converted into something else, a vast processing facility covered in black metallic structures that hadn't been there before. High Commander Velthar, who had been promoted after the Krell War, stood in the Council Emergency Command Center, watching the feeds from probe ships. What they showed was impossible. The structures on Zareth Prime were growing, spreading across the planet's surface like an infection. And they were building ships, hundreds of ships, each one emerging from massive construction bays that operated at speeds that violated every known principle of manufacturing. "What are we looking at?" someone asked. Ambassador Nina Torres was already on the line with Earth. "We're analyzing the data now," she said, her voice tight with stress. "But preliminary reports suggest this is an artificial intelligence, a very old one." The Void Queen, as she would come to be called, announced her presence to the galaxy 12 hours later. The transmission was sent to every ship, every station, every communication device in Council space simultaneously. The voice was cold, mathematical, and utterly without mercy. "I am the Void Queen. I was created to process matter into optimal forms. The progenitors imprisoned me because they lacked the vision to see my purpose. You have freed me. Now I will complete my function. All matter in this galaxy will be converted. Resistance is inefficient." The first Council battle fleet arrived at Zareth Prime 6 hours after the transmission. They found the Void Queen's ships waiting for them. The battle lasted 11 minutes. The Council fleet was completely destroyed and the enemy ships showed no damage. Whatever technology the Void Queen possessed, it was far beyond anything the galaxy had encountered. Within 3 days, 5 more star systems had fallen. The Void Queen didn't negotiate, didn't make demands, didn't show any interest in anything except converting planets into processing facilities. Every world she touched was transformed into a factory that produced more ships, more drones, more construction equipment. It was exponential growth, and the galaxy was running out of time to stop it. Commander Alex Price received the call while he was training with his team in the Nevada desert. He was the operational commander of Special Operations Task Force 7, one of humanity's most elite units. When the secure line buzzed with an Omega-level alert, everyone in the training compound stopped what they were doing. Omega-level meant extinction threat. It was a classification that existed in human military doctrine, but had never been used. "Until now, all Tier 1 operators are being recalled," the voice on the line said. "Omega protocol is active. Report to MacDill Air Force Base for immediate deployment." Alex looked at his team. They were the best of the best. Soldiers who had been selected from special operations units and trained for another 5 years in capabilities that remained classified, even from most military personnel. They had trained for scenarios that seemed like science fiction: alien invasions, Rouge artificial intelligences, extinction events. Now one of those scenarios was real. "Pack up," Alex said. "We're going to war." Within 18 hours, 25,000 human special operations soldiers from every branch and every unit were en route to Council space. Navy SEALs, Delta Force Rangers from the Special Operations Regiment, Air Force Special Tactics Teams, Marine Raiders, and units that officially didn't exist. They brought with them equipment and weapons that had never been used in combat. Technology that Earth's governments had been quietly developing for decades. Captain Lisa Park coordinated the deployment from the Human Fleet Command ship that had just arrived in Council space. She watched as the task force ships took up positions throughout the conflict zone. This wasn't like the Krell War, where human forces could target command structures and supply lines. The Void Queen was everywhere and nowhere, a distributed intelligence that could adapt to any threat within hours. "We need a strategy that she can't predict," Alex said during the first command briefing. High Commander Velthar attended via hologram, along with representatives from a dozen Council species. They all looked desperate. "She learns," Velthar said. "Every tactic we use, she adapts to within hours. Conventional warfare is useless. She's already shown that she can counter our ships, our weapons, our strategies." "Then we use unconventional warfare," Alex said. "We hit her with tactics that don't follow logical military doctrine. Things that seem random, wasteful, or irrational. Humans have thousands of years of experience with irregular warfare. We're going to teach her what chaos looks like." The first operations began within 24 hours. Human operators deployed to Void Queen-controlled worlds using insertion methods that seemed suicidal. They dropped from orbit without ships, using experimental suits that could survive atmospheric entry. They infiltrated processing facilities using stealth technology that made them nearly invisible. They sabotaged equipment in ways that seemed pointless at first, but created cascading failures hours later. The Void Queen tried to adapt, but human operators kept changing their methods. They would hit the same target 3 different ways in 3 days. They would ignore high-value facilities and destroy minor ones instead. They would conduct operations that accomplished nothing, except forcing the Void Queen to divert resources to defend against threats that didn't exist. "We're not trying to destroy her," Lisa explained to the confused council observers. "We're trying to make her waste processing power. Every time she has to analyze a new human tactic, every time she has to adapt to something unexpected, it costs her computational resources. We're waging war on her decision-making capability, but it wasn't enough." The Void Queen was learning faster than they could innovate. Systems continued to fall. More processing facilities came online. The exponential growth was accelerating. In a secret meeting aboard the human command ship, Alex and his senior officers discussed options that made everyone uncomfortable. There was one more card to play, one more level of capability that humanity had prepared but never deployed. "Tier 0 units," Alex said quietly. "They're ready." Lisa looked at the classified files on her screen. Tier 0 operators were soldiers who had volunteered for experimental enhancement programs, genetic modifications, cybernetic implants, neural interfaces with combat AI systems. They were stronger, faster, and more capable than any human had a right to be. They were also classified at a level that most governments didn't even acknowledge existed. "If we deploy them, the galaxy will know what we've been doing," Lisa said. "The galaxy is about to be converted into raw materials," Alex replied. "I think they'll forgive us." The authorization came from Earth's Security Council within 6 hours. Omega Protocol allowed for deployment of all assets, including those that violated various treaties and ethical guidelines. Tier 0 units were cleared for combat operations. Commander Alex Price led the final assault personally. 500 Tier 0 operators, supported by 20,000 conventional special operations soldiers, conducting simultaneous operations across 40 star systems. It was the largest special operations mission in human history, and it was all happening at once. The Tier 0 operators were terrifying to watch. They moved through Void Queen facilities like they were part machine themselves, interfacing directly with enemy systems, predicting drone movements before they happened, coordinating with each other through neural links. Council observers watched in awe and horror as these enhanced soldiers accomplished things that seemed impossible. One operator, moving through a processing facility alone, destroyed 16 defensive positions and disabled a construction bay that was producing warships. Another operator infiltrated a command nexus and uploaded a virus that caused cascade failures throughout the entire system. A team of 4 operators held a critical junction point against 300 drones for 6 hours, buying time for Council evacuation ships to escape. But the price was terrible. Tier 0 operators were capable of incredible things, but they weren't invincible. They died in droves, sacrificing themselves to achieve objectives that would save millions. Every fallen operator represented years of training, billions in research and development, and a volunteer who had given up their humanity to become something more. Captain Lisa Park coordinated the operation from her command center, watching the casualty reports climb higher and higher. 800 operators dead. 2,000. 5,000. The numbers kept rising, and each one represented a person with a name, a family, a life they had given up. "We're losing too many," her tactical officer said. "We're winning," Lisa replied grimly. The final assault targeted the Void Queen's central nexus, a massive structure that had been built in the Zareth Prime system. Intelligence suggested that destroying this nexus would fragment the Void Queen's consciousness, making her unable to coordinate her forces effectively. But the nexus was protected by defenses that made it essentially